Welcome to session 12 of Old Testament Survey. We're in Genesis, beginning at chapter 25, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. I see people continuing to sign into the classroom. Welcome. As we get into chapter 25, we're shifting gears from Isaac to the next in line, which is Jacob. And Isaac kind of winds down. We really don't see all that much of Isaac. He's a key character in the Messianic line. He's the character who demonstrates the life from the dead object lesson of salvation. So he's a very important character. Nevertheless, he's a transition. He transitions from Abraham to Jacob. Then with the Jacob story, we get quite a long narrative. There's a lot of story here. And it's not because Jacob is such a nice guy. Jacob is something of an anti-hero. He never comes through in this story with a white hat like the old cowboy movies. He comes out with like a con man, like an old-fashioned bad guy. Excuse me a second, I'm going to move a light. I love my technology, just not very much. Jacob comes across like a con man. He's always working an angle. He's always got something going, and we see him from the very earliest times, from before his birth, and moving all through his life. Every note that we see of Jacob, he's trying to gain an advantage, trying to gain some position on people he sees as his enemies. He's not an admirable character at all. And yet, and this is really important, Jacob is the next character in the line of promise. That is, he's in the line of Christ. Not everybody in the line of Christ is a plaster saint. Not everybody in the line of Christ is a hero. But Jacob, we're quite sure, is a saved man in the Old Testament sense. We're going to find Jacob in heaven. He's listed in the Hall of Fame, the Hall of Faith in the book of Hebrews. So Jacob is, for what he's worth, a faithful man, and that makes him interesting on a lot of levels, as we see how God interacts in the life and through the life of a man who is a believer, but yet often slides back, often fails, often does things that he ought not do. So we're going to begin in chapter 25. Let me start a share. This always takes longer than it needs to, but here we are. Beginning at verse 19, this last slide, the succession from Ishmael, it's just a genealogy from Ishmael. This runs from 12 through 18, and there's a series of names. Ishmael lived 137 years. He settled in the area between Havilah and Shur, which is opposite Egypt in the direction of Assyria. So Ishmael's land was what we would call the Western Saudi Arabian Peninsula, from roughly the area of modern Eilat to the northern part of what we would call Yemen, and east of the the Red Sea, actually, the Gulf of Aqaba there. So across from the Sinai, Sinai was considered Egypt, and he had that territory. That territory today is the homeland of the Arabic peoples, and it's also the birthplace, at least traditionally, of Islam. It is entirely possible that Islam was born farther north in an area we call Petra, but it doesn't matter uh, for our lessons today. Anyway, that's the succession of Ishmael. Ishmael becomes the father of all of the nomadic peoples, the Arabic-speaking peoples, and ultimately of Islam. The succession from Isaac is actually Jacob's story, and this runs from 25 to 35. This picture in the background reminds us of Jacob's process of building altars. Jacob builds a number of altars throughout his life. This is an aspect of Jacob's faith. Let me see if I can point out with my, I've got my mouse here, and you can see this kind of squarish rectangular stone structure on the right-hand side of the picture. That's the altar of a temple in the Israeli Negev, a place called Arad. This particular temple and the altar in it were built 1,000 years after the time of Jacob, but the structure is very similar. You notice that the altar is built of uncut rocks, just piled up in a nice orderly fashion, but not done with bricks or finely cut stones, just a big pile of rocks. And that's typical of Israelite altars all the way through history. So that's why I included this particular picture. I think we'll come back to this particular picture, add some other pictures from this temple later when I start talking about the shape of the temple. As we begin the story of Jacob, it starts out with the birth of Jacob in 25 and verse 19. And where did it happen? Well, we don't know. This photograph was taken in the Negev, west of Beersheba, south of the Gaza Strip. People say, well, I thought that was all desert. Well, it was up until fairly recently. And in biblical times, it was actually cropland. Jacob and Isaac would have known pasture land in this area. Today, the Israelis have managed to make grains and fruits and all sorts of things grow in this edge of the desert. So 25:19. These are the generations of Isaac. In other words, here's what comes after Isaac. Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean of Paddan Aram, sister of Laban, the Aramean. We're going to run into Laban again. So you can see Laban is going to be an uncle to Jacob. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. Now that's a nice variation. So for Abraham, Abraham prayed, and Sarah prayed, and God always said, "Wait, I'm going to make you a great nation." But wait, because of the object lesson, life from the dead. With the case of Isaac and Rebecca, there's no need for that object lesson. The point has already been made. Isaac prayed, Rebecca is going to conceive. The children, however, struggled together within her. So she had twins, which in the ancient world was considered quite an achievement. It was a pretty big deal. And the children struggled together within her. And she said, "If it is thus, why is this happening to me?" The Hebrew is a bit more earthy than that. Is something to the effect of, "Why the devil am I having so much trouble with these kids?" Uh, that kind of an outburst. It's interesting that they struggled because these twins, Jacob and Esau, will struggle throughout their lives. They're going to be um, opponents, hostile throughout their lives and throughout the history of Israel. The nation that is descended from Jacob will struggle with the nation descended from Esau throughout all of history and down to the present day. So this is another one of those. And we see the beginnings of a long, hostile relationship. So the children struggled, and Rebecca was unhappy. She went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said to her, which has to be interesting. I honestly don't know how God talked to the patriarchs and their wives, but Rebecca knew that God was speaking with her. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you shall be divided. The one shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." Now, that turns out to be fairly important. Uh, the standard way of passing an inheritance in the ancient world, and just about all of the cultures that we have studied in the Near East, uh, is that the property, whatever property a family has, is passed on at the father's death to the firstborn son. We call that the birthright. The girls in a family didn't have a birthright. They were expected to marry and raise their own family and become the wives of some other man in the community. But the sons were expected to pick up where their father left off. The eldest son would get the largest share of the birthright. That's his right. That's the way it was always done. There are very, very few exceptions to that rule unless the firstborn dies. We see that in some cases in the literature. But here, the promise is made that the older, the firstborn, will serve the younger. That is, the younger twin, the second-born twin, is going to inherit the birthright. Now, why is this important? Why do we have this note? The note is put here so that we know, as Rebecca knew, and as probably Isaac knew, that the birthright would go to Jacob rather than to Esau. That's the key issue here. It was God's intention before these children were born that the older would serve the younger. And this was based not on foreseeing the goodness in Jacob or foreseeing the evil in Esau, because quite frankly, both of them were bad guys. They were both unfaithful and difficult, and I wouldn't have given the birthright to either of them. But that wasn't one of the options. And God says the older will serve the younger. Before they were born, before either of them had done anything, whether good or evil, God said this because, as we're told in the book of Malachi, Jacob I loved and Esau I hated. And that's quoted in the book of Romans. This is fundamental to the doctrine of election that we find in the Old Testament. The doctrine of election is not something that was invented by Protestants in the 16th century. The doctrine of election is basic to Old Testament thought. Jacob is considered the chosen son, and not because he's good, or even because God foresaw that he would be good, because we clearly know that Jacob was not a good guy. Election is on the basis solely of God's choice. And the work of producing righteousness in Jacob, the righteousness of justification, was entirely a work of God's grace, not a reward for Jacob's goodness. All of the religious systems of the world, including Judaism since the time of Christ, that emphasize working at religious goodness in order to earn salvation, are a misunderstanding of the Bible. The Bible is really clear, and stories like this add up to make it very clear that salvation is a work of God. God doesn't save us because we're good. God saves us because he is good. You've heard me say that before, and it won't be the last time. It's a very important concept, and I think particularly operating in a Roman Catholic nation like Italy or in the Philippines, this is something we need to remember, because we're all going to have friends and relatives even who hold a contrary point of view. God saves us by his grace. So when her days to give birth were completed, behold, there were twins in her womb. Don't tell me she didn't know that. And the first came out red, all his body like a hairy cloak. And so they called him Esau, which means red-haired. He's a redhead. He's got a red beard and he's got red hair all over his body. That's a little hard to visualize in a baby, but that's what it says. When ours were born, some of them had hair and some didn't. Usually the hair fell out, and then they got a whole new batch. I wonder what happened with Esau. We don't know. And afterwards, his brother came out with his hand holding Esau's heel. And so his name was called Jacob, Yaakov, which means a grasper, somebody who grabs the heel and is pulled out. So Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah bore the twins. Now the story goes on. It just skips through, we don't know how many years, but several years, probably 20 years. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field, while Jacob was a quiet man dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because of the wild game. Isaac was getting a little old to go out and hunt his own wild game. So Esau did that for him. And Rebekah loved Jacob because Jacob was around all the time and he liked to stay by the tents and he'd help his mom and he'd work around the place. He probably did some farming in the area. So one day, verse 29, we see the transfer of the birthright, which is a fascinating thing. Esau is going to sell his birthright. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, the word stew there means red stuff, and we think it was made of lentils as a kind of little bean, and you mix that up perhaps with some meat, but not necessarily, and it's made. What fell down? Something fell down behind me. Okay, don't worry about it. I don't think I'm going to have a problem, Donna. Don't worry about it. It was going to fall earlier, yeah. Okay. Once when Jacob was cooking this red stuff, like a bowl of chili with beans, Esau came in from the field and he was exhausted. Esau said to Jacob, "Let me eat some of that red stuff, for I'm exhausted." And therefore his name was called Edom. Now, Edom and Esau mean essentially the same thing. Edom is, well, don't worry about it. It's a different language. But Esau is going to become the father of the nation that we call Edom. Down toward the southern end of the Araba Valley, actually between Ishmael to the south and Moab to the north. That's going to be Edom's territory. And Esau said, "I'm about to die." Oh, wait a minute. His name was called Edom, and so Jacob said, "Sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "I'm about to die. What use is a birthright to me?" And so Jacob said, "Well, swear to me." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and rose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Now, people have wondered about this, as we've got two different stories going on here. When Rebecca was pregnant, the Lord said, the older will serve the younger. In other words, the younger will inherit the birthright. So it was God's plan for Jacob to inherit the birthright. So is what Jacob does here a good thing because it accomplishes the will of God? The simple answer is no. Jacob was stealing the birthright. Now, God had promised that he would inherit it. God didn't promise that he would steal it. What he's doing here is essentially wrong. Now, at the same time, Esau was wrong. The birthright is something that Esau didn't possess yet. That's the inheritance from the father. He didn't possess that yet. He had no real rights to buy, sell, or do anything else with his birthright. It simply existed. And for him to sell it is, yeah, it's an act of pride on some levels. Esau despised his own birthright. He despised who he was as a child of his father. That's is actually a terrible thing. That's not a praiseworthy thing at all. It's a very bad thing that Esau did here. He despised his birthright. Chapter 26, we see a brief note about God's reiteration, his repetition of the promise to Isaac. There was a famine in the land, 26:1. And Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, the king of the Philistines. Different Abimelech, by the way. Abraham went to Abimelech of the Philistines, and the Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you. I will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands. I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father. I will multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven, and will give to your offspring all these lands. And in your offspring all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." Okay, it's interesting. What we're seeing here is a repeat of the Abrahamic covenant. The emphasis here is on two elements. One is the promise of the land. That's really what this picture is all about, and the nation. So the land and the nation. These are two components of the promise to Abraham that we see coming up over and over again in the Old Testament. We're not going to mention it every time, but these things continue to come up. This is a repeated theme in the Old Testament. Uh, I'll multiply you like the stars of the heaven. Same promise to Isaac as to Abraham. The rest of chapter 26 is the story about Isaac lying to Abimelech about his wife. Again, apparently Rebecca was also a very pretty lady, and he's worried that the men of the land will steal his wife. So she says, she's my sister. And it doesn't work out any better here than it has before. This uh, grandson of Abimelech that Abraham knew rebukes Isaac in the same way that Abraham had been rebuked. I mean, it's a very strange story. Sometimes we say that a son turns out like his father. He doesn't fall very far from the tree. Uh, the the emphasis, I think it's again, it's an important emphasis, is that none of the patriarchs were perfect. None of the patriarchs were sinlessly perfect. They made mistakes, they sinned, they lacked faith, they turned away from the promises on numerous occasions. God had said, stay here in the land, and yet uh, Isaac was tempted to leave. Now he says, just trust me, I'll make sure you've got everything. But he goes down to Abimelech. It's uh, just an important repetition of a basic idea. The covenant uh, is repeated to Isaac in many of the same terms, a lot of the same precise language as it was given to Abraham. So this is the same covenant, and it continues in force, not just for Abraham, but for Abraham and Isaac. And then in chapter 27, we're going to discover that this covenant is passed on to Jacob. So let's take a look at Jacob in chapter 27. Isaac was old, and his eyes were dim, so that he could not see. He called Esau, his eldest son, and said, my son. And he answered, here I am. He said, behold, I'm old. I don't know the day of my death. Now take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, go out to the field, hunt some game for me, prepare for me delicious food such as I love, and bring it to me so that I may eat, that my soul may bless you before I die. So this is actually a fairly traditional scene. We see this before death blessing scene several times in the Bible. And we know that this is the way it happened in the ancient world. Isaac was getting old. He says, Esau, go out, make me a meal, and I will bless you before I die. Now, Rebecca was listening. Now, Rebecca knew all along that Isaac intended to give the birthright to Esau. Rebecca knows what the score is. And Rebecca favored Jacob. So she enters into a conspiracy with Jacob. Again, just a note here, Rebecca may be a lovely lady and a picture of the church, but if she's a picture of the church, she is as flawed as we are. She had her jealousies and her plots and counter plots, just like the modern church. We're not all that much different. So Rebecca was listening, and Rebecca said to her son Jacob, I heard your father speak to Esau, bring me some game that I may bless you before I die. Now therefore obey my voice as I command you. Go to the flock, bring me 2 good young goats. Two, I mean, how many goats can you eat at one sitting? Uh, we've got a couple of goats out in the barn, and I can't imagine getting through one of them, let alone 2. But maybe they were skinny goats. I don't know. Uh, He said, go out and get me a couple of goats, and I will prepare them into delicious food for your father, such as he loves. So Rebecca knows how to make a domestic goat taste like a wild gazelle, for instance. I don't know how you do that, but Rebecca knew the spices. And you will bring it to your father. He will eat it, and he will bless you before he dies. But Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, behold, my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be mocking him, and bring a curse upon myself, not a blessing. And his mother said to him, let your curse be on me, my son, only obey my voice. So off he went, and he brought the goats, and his mother prepared them. And Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her older son, which were with her in the house, and she put them on Jacob. And the skins of the young goats she put on his hands and the smooth part of his neck. Uh, I, I guess Esau really was a very hairy guy. She put the delicious food and the bread which she'd prepared into the hand of her son Jacob, and he went to his father and said, here I am. Uh, and his father said, who are you, my son? And Jacob said to his father, I'm Esau, your firstborn. I've done as you told me. Now sit up, eat of my game, that my soul may bless me, that your soul may bless me. And so Jacob is playing along here to the point of lying about the whole affair. Uh, Jacob is not blameless. He's not merely obeying orders. Is wrong to obey an illegal order. Everybody knows, and Jacob should have known. He shouldn't have done it, and yet he did it. Jacob said, "I'm Esau," and Isaac said, "How is it that you found it so quickly, my son?" And Jacob played the game, and because the Lord your God granted me success. Notice the Lord your God rather than the Lord my God. Jacob is still at this point in his life an unbeliever. That's going to change, and it doesn't change very dramatically. Jacob does not ever become this massively converted, truly wonderful believer. Uh, but the Lord your God, granted me success. And Isaac said, please come near that I may feel you, my son, to know whether you are really my son Esau or not. So, for reasons that are not explained, Isaac had some doubts about the entire situation. So he felt Jacob's neck and the backs of his arms, and he felt all the goat hair. But he said, "Well, yep, the hands are the hands of Esau, but your voice sure sounds an awful lot like Jacob." And he was suspicious, but he didn't recognize that this was in fact Jacob's, and so he blessed him. He said, "Are you really my son Esau?" And he answered, "I am." I said, "Well, bring near that I may eat my son's game." And he brought it near to him, and he ate and he drank. And his father said to him, "Come near and kiss me, my son." He came near and kissed him. And Isaac smelled the smell of his garments and blessed him and said, and here we have the Isaac blessing. Behold, the smell of my son is as the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and plenty of grain and wine. Let people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be everyone who curses you, blessed be everyone who blesses you. Okay, that's a pretty good blessing. And again, it's important for us to remember that the blessing doesn't come from Isaac, the blessing comes from God. And it was from before Jacob was born, God's intention that Jacob should inherit the birthright. Jacob didn't have to lie, cheat, and steal in order to accomplish God's plan for him. I'm not sure how it would have worked out otherwise. This makes a great story. But uh, Jacob Jacob comes across as a con man, and Isaac comes across as a man who's trying mightily to thwart the will of God. And again, that's not for neither of these. No, nobody in this family is a model of righteousness. At any rate, the blessing is remarkably similar to the Abrahamic blessing and to the blessing that God gave to Isaac. This is fairly important. The peoples will serve you, nations will bow down. You'll be a lord over your brothers. There's only one brother so far. That's Esau. But the point is that Jacob will turn out on top. He will be the ruler of all of these families, all of these peoples. So you'll be lord over your brothers, and your mother's sons will bow down to you. Okay. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father. Esau came in, stage left. So we've got this scene. Jacob waves goodbye and disappears from the stage, and then you hear the footsteps off stage thumping up the stairs, and here comes Esau thumping across the stage, dragging his gazelle behind him, saying, "Here I am, Dad, ready for the big blessing." And he prepared delicious food. He brought it to his father. He said, "Father, arise, eat, bless me." As Father Isaac said, "Who are you?" He said, "Well, who do you think I was? I'm Esau, your firstborn." And Isaac trembled in verse 33 and said, "Who was it then who hunted game and brought it to me? And I ate, and I have blessed him. Yes, and indeed he shall be blessed." Uh, Isaac took it that there was a legal imperative for him to stand by the words of his blessing. This goes back to Mesopotamian custom. And for now, let's just leave it at that. Isaac was obeying the law of the land in doing this, and he shall be blessed. As soon as Esau heard the words of his father, he cried with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and he said to his father, "Bless me, even me also, my father." And he said, "Your brother came deceitfully; he has taken away your blessing." Now Esau clearly has forgotten that years ago he sold that blessing. That's all gone. What did Esau think he was doing when he despised his birthright? Uh, Jacob is simply following through on an agreement that they had made many years before. It all gets very complex, and nobody here is admirable. So he said, "Have you not reserved a blessing for me?" Isaac answered and said, "Behold, I've made him lord over you, and all his brothers I have given to him for servants, and with grain and wine I've sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?" And Esau said to his father, "Have you but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, my father." And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. So it's kind of a sad scene. And so Isaac came up with a blessing, and you can tell that he's coming up with this blessing extemporaneously. He hasn't practiced this, and it doesn't come off so well. Listen to the blessing. "Behold, away from the fatness of the earth shall your dwelling be." Oh, well, that's not good. That's You're going to live out in the desert. "Away from the dew of heaven on high." You're going to live in a place where it never rains, except when it does rain, it washes all the dirt away. But by your sword you shall live, and you shall serve your brother. By your sword you shall live. You'll be a nomad in the desert. And the only way you'll get anything is to steal it from other people by threatening them with your sword. Oh, now that sounds pleasant. And you shall serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you shall break his yoke from your neck. So the picture here is of an eternal animosity between Esau and Jacob. And what that works out to is an eternal animosity between the nation of Israel, which is Jacob's descendants, and the nation of Edom, which is Esau's descendants. Edom becomes a part of the mixed Arabic-speaking multitude who live across the Jordan along the edge of the desert. Edom is a part of the Arab people groups. They're not all from Ishmael. So we've got Ishmael, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, along with some others in here, who are the peoples of the East, who will be the major challenge for Israel throughout Old Testament history. Now, verse 41, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing. Yeah, that's a big surprise. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. And so she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about planning to kill you. You know, what a comfortable thing to think about. Oh, goody, I can hardly wait for my chance to kill my brother. Um, to say this is in America, we speak of a dysfunctional family. Here's a family that isn't working right. There's just some wrong things going on here. So Esau can hardly wait for his opportunity to kill Jacob. So she sent for Jacob and said, behold, your brother Esau is getting ready to kill you. Now, therefore, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban, my brother, in Haran. Stay with him a while until your brother's fury blows over, until your brother's anger turns away from you and he forgets what you've done to him. Right, he's going to forget. Well, interestingly, it turns out that he does. Because the fact of the matter is, Esau despised his birthright. He never intended to work with the sheep and the cattle and the pastures and the tents. He had no interest in that. He was a wild, nomadic kind of a man to begin with. And once he went off on his own, he didn't turn back. He didn't miss this. And we're going to see later on when Jacob finally meets Esau that they actually have a fairly peaceful meeting. It's a very strange thing. So this story is going to go on. So Rebekah said to Isaac, I loathe my life because of all the Hittite women around here. No, we're not told in other history or anywhere else in the Bible that there's a particularly large number of Hittite women where Isaac and Rebekah lived. They lived out on the edge of the wilderness. Nevertheless, it served Rebekah's purposes. He says, if Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me? Oh, I'd rather die than see my son marry one of these Hittite women. So Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and said to him, don't take a wife from amongst the Canaanites. Arise, go to Padan Aram. And so off Jacob goes. And this is the beginning of a long sojourn. Jacob is going to go away to Haran. He's going to go to ultimately to Abraham's family there in Mesopotamia, and he's going to spend long enough to put together a family, and quite a family. 2 wives, 2 maidservants, and a dozen boys. And we're not told how many daughters. One is mentioned, Dinah is mentioned, but it's quite a family, and it's going to take quite a number of years. So Isaac called Jacob and said, "Don't take one of the Canaanite women. Arise, go to Padan Aram, and meet up with Laban. Find one of his daughters, and you'll be fine. And God Almighty bless you." That's God Almighty is El Shaddai. And we're going to see that name again as we have seen it before. May God bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. And of course, this is the fulfillment of that blessing is the production of the 12 tribes of Israel. So he gave the blessing to Abraham and to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God gave to Abraham. Thus Isaac sent Jacob away, and off he went to Padan Aram to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, brother of Rebekah, Jacob and Esau's mother. Okay, so there goes the story. Esau, meanwhile, in verses 6 through 9, tells the story of Esau's marriages and the beginning of his own career. Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob, sent him away, and he blessed him. He directed him, you must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. And Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and gone to Padan Aram. So when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac, his father, Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Okay, so Mahalath is a daughter of Ishmael, and Ishmael is already becoming an enemy people group. And Esau is a polygamist. He's got multiple wives already, and in addition, he's going to take this nomadic woman. Esau continues down a path that is unpleasing to his parents and ultimately unpleasing to God. Okay, that takes us down to Jacob's dream. Jacob left Beersheba, and let me see here. This is really the end of chapter 28. And we haven't quite gotten to Padan Aram yet, but I wanted to show you this piece of pottery. This is actually fairly late pottery, but that's a depiction of Jacob's ladder. And it would have been steeper, but they ran out of room on the pot. So that's what that's supposed to be. So Jacob had a dream. He left Beersheba, went toward Haran. Beersheba is in the south of Israel. He came up the patriarch's highway and stopped at a certain place and spent the night there because the sun had set. So this certain place that he stopped was nowhere in particular. There was no city here. There was no altar here. There was nothing. He was out in the middle of nowhere. And it turns out that this is the same general area in which Abraham many years before had camped, between Ai and Bethel. And neither Ai nor Bethel existed at the time of Abraham or of Isaac or of Jacob. But the name of the place is between Ai and Bethel. And I'm not going to try to explain that. That's just that's what the Bible is always going to describe this place as. And we're going to see the name of Bethel here in a moment. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and on top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it, and behold, the Lord stood above it, and he said, now we have the Lord appearing to Jacob. And God's speech to Jacob here in chapter 28, beginning at verse 13, is the restatement of the Abrahamic covenant. So the promise comes again. The Lord stood above and he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give you and your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the east and the west and the north and the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. So look at the elements of the promise here. There's the promise of the land. There's a promise that Jacob will become a great nation. There's a promise of a universal blessing, all the nations of the earth. And there's a promise of personal blessing, that I will bring you back to this place and I will do what I have promised to do. Here again, the unconditional promise made to Abraham is repeated as it was to Isaac. Here it is repeated to Jacob. And again, Jacob has not done anything to earn this promise. That, I think, is significant. And Jacob awoke from his sleep and he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar. And you wonder how big a pillar it would have been, if he could get his head on it. Anyway, he set it up as a pillar and he poured oil on top of it, and he called the name of the place Bethel. Bethel means house of God. Bet is house, El is short for Elohim, the house of God. And the name of the city at first was called Luz when it was finally founded as a city. And then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord will be my God. Well, here's good old Jacob making a deal with God. The Hebrew here suggests that Jacob is not so sure about God's promises, and so he's trying to get it in writing. But if you do this and this and this, then you will be my God. And God has already said, I am your God. I'm the God of Abraham and Isaac. I'm your God as well. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to be a blessing through you, this land, the people. These are unconditional promises. And yet Jacob assumes that this is all conditional. So he says, if you will do that, I will follow through on my part of the promise. He doesn't want to be out from under his own good works. And actually, Jacob's good works are not particularly good. He said, and this stone which I've set up as a pillar shall be God's house, a temple. And all that you give me, I will give a tenth to you. So there is Jacob's fear in this place leads to a kind of personal consecration of the place. Uh, he uh, he even begins to call on the name of the Lord. I take this as probably Jacob's conversion event. And it's a pretty lukewarm conversion. I'm not sure that Jacob really understands what he's getting into or what he's promising or what God has done. Nevertheless, he sets up a pillar, he pours oil on top. Later on, we're going to see an altar here. This is the beginning of Jacob's walk with God. Chapter 29, we see the beginning of the sojourn in Mesopotamia. The place is called Paddan Aram. And Jacob went on his journey, and he came to the land of the people of the east. And he saw a well in the field and 3 flocks of sheep. And out of that well, the flocks were watered. And the stone was on the mouth's well, and it was very large. And all the flocks were gathered there. And the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep and put the stone back. And Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" And they said, "We're from Haran." And he said to them, "Do you know Laban, the son of Nahor?" And they said, "We know him." He said, "Is it well with him?" And they said, "Oh, it is very well with him. And behold, Rachel, his daughter, is coming with the sheep." And he said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time that the livestock be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered. And the stone is rolled, and then we water the sheep." And while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, and the sheep, notice that, of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So this stone is so big that it takes several grown men to move it aside. Jacob did it all by himself because he was all pizzle sprung. He was, in the words of Walt Disney in the old movie Bambi, Jacob was Twitter-pated. He was head over heels, infatuated, in love with Rachel. Now, this wasn't really love. Love is a commitment that you make to do what's right for another person. And Jacob was only interested in himself. He wanted that pretty girl. He didn't know much of anything about her except that she's a pretty girl. And he decided he was going to grab that one for himself one way or another. And so he kind of cut her out of the herd and moved in for the kill. I don't like Jacob, but maybe you didn't get that earlier. He moved right in, and he, having rolled the stone away and watered the flock, Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. Now, in the ancient Near East, as today, if I move in on a pretty girl in public and give her a big kiss, that's considered bad manners. This was not normal. This was not typical behavior. This is not something that. I mean, the shepherds had probably never seen anybody do anything like this. It would have been scandalous. So Jacob grabs Rachel, gives her a big kiss. Jacob wept aloud, and he told Rachel he was her father's kinsman, that he was Rebekah's son. She ran and told her father. And probably told him the whole story. Laban was thinking, a kinsman. He's probably come here to get a wife. Maybe I can make a profit from this. What we've got with Laban I wonder if this runs in families, because Laban, Rebecca's brother, is every bit as bad a con man as Jacob. Jacob has finally met his match. So Laban heard the news. He ran to meet him, embraced him, kissed him, a different kind of kiss, I guarantee it, and brought him to the house. And Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." And he stayed there for a month. And Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. So the plot thickens. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Now Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. And Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Now, Jacob is making the contract here very clear. You want to know what my wages should be? Very simple. I want Rachel, your younger daughter, of the 2 daughters, because by this time Jacob knew that. I know you have 2, and I want the younger one, Rachel. She'll be my wife, and that would be my wages, and I'll work for 7 years. Now, this actually sounds like a fairly reasonable deal. And Laban said, and notice what Laban says in verse 19. It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. So stay with me. Now, did you hear Laban promise to give Rachel to Jacob? No, I didn't either. What he said was, it would be better that I should give her to you than to anybody else. So stay with me. He didn't agree to the terms. That's going to turn out to be important here in another few verses. So Jacob served 7 years. And then I like the latter part of verse 20. And they seemed to him but a few days because of the love that he had for her. He was so Twitter-pated, 7 years just went by in a flash. And after 7 years went by, Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So it's time for a wedding. Jacob is probably already over 40 years old. It's time for him to get up and go. No, I'm miscounting my years. I'll have to go back and rethink that. But anyway, Jacob said, give me my wife, that I may go into her." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. And in the evening, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. Now, Leah would have been all in her finery, her wedding dress, and all of the veils and all of the rest of it. And as the feast went on, the happy couple, having feasted, would have retired to a tent set up for the purpose in the midst of the feast area. And the 2 of them would publicly go into the tent together. That was for the consummation of the marriage. And it was done as a part of the celebration. In a modern Jewish wedding, there is a canopy we call the chuppah. Chuppah is the tent of the wedding night. And it's a tradition. You'll always see that at traditional Jewish weddings. The feast is another important thing. The feast can go on, even in modern Jewish weddings, the feast can go on for days. It was traditional to have a wedding on a Tuesday night and then carry on for several days, as long as the food and drink lasted. A lot of fascinating traditions that we can see being carried out even here. So here we have it. Laban has given Leah, and along with Leah, Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter. And Zilpah is going to become a part of the package. And in the morning, in the morning, behold, it was Leah. So Jacob woke up and he looked over at the girl that he'd spent the night with and discovered that he'd married the wrong one. Here's Leah. Now, it's traditional for commentators to mention that Jacob was disappointed. I think it's important for us to think about Leah because the disappointment for Leah must have been profound. She knew going in that Jacob didn't like her, let alone love her. That Jacob wanted her younger sister. Leah knew that she was not loved, and she was obedient to her father. And in the morning, for Jacob to look at her with disappointment must have been horribly shattering. It was an awful thing. This one scene alone is enough for me to hate Laban for the rest of my life. Laban is such an evil character. To do a thing like this to a daughter is just terrible. And I don't feel the slightest bit sorry for Jacob. Jacob is a con man. He got what he deserved. But this is a terrible thing to do to Leah. And very, very importantly, we're going to find out that God is at work in the midst of all of this. But the story goes on. So Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife." And there was Leah. In the morning, behold, it was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you've done? Didn't I serve you for 7 years? Now you've deceived me." And Laban says, "It's not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Tell you what, for you, because I like you, I'll make you a special deal. Complete the marriage week for this one, and I'll give you the other also, in return for a mere 7 more years." How does that sound? And Jacob agreed to this deal and completed the bridal week for Leah. And then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel, along with a female servant by the name of Bilhah. So Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah and served Laban for another 7 years. Now, this story continues, and we're going to start seeing all 4 of these women producing children. And the Lord saw that Leah was hated. He opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. There's that common theme. And Leah conceived and bore a son. She called his name Reuben. She conceived again, and this was Simeon. And she conceived again, and that was Levi. And the 4th son of Leah, she named Judah. Now, notice that the firstborn is Reuben. And you would think, well, that would be the child of promise. That's where the Messiah will come. But no. The child of promise, the child through whom the messianic line will pass, is Judah. We find that later on. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is going to be Christ. David is of the line of Judah. The messianic line will pass through Judah on through David down to Joseph and Mary, who are the parents of Jesus. This is a stunning thing. There's the 4th patriarch we'll get to on Friday is Joseph, and his story is not the story of the 4th in the messianic line, because Joseph is a son of Rachel in Jacob's old age. Joseph is not the child of promise at all. And yet, it's through him that the story continues. So, Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children. She envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and so on. Anyway, we've got this dysfunctional family, Rachel gives her handmaid. Leah competes with Rachel, gives her a handmaid, and eventually, at the end of it all, uh, uh, Jacob is going to have children with Rachel. But by that time, he's got 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, during this period, this 14-year period in Padan Aram, Jacob becomes very wealthy. On sheep and goats and camels and donkeys and all kinds of things, much of it through trickery. He does a lot of selective breeding. And I won't explain all of that, but he breeds the sheep and goats so that they come out one color, not another, and everything works very well. Eventually, at the end of this period, chapter 31, we see the story of Jacob's flight from Laban. Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, "Jacob has taken all that was our father's." And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before, and he decided that it would be a good time to get out of town. And so Jacob called Rachel and Leah, and he said, "We need to get out right away. So grab what's important to you, and let's run for it tonight." So they left town. We say they left town in their socks. They just got out of town without carrying much of anything with them, except that Rachel stole the household gods. Interesting. The household gods were the collection of valuable metals and jewelry in the household, turned into idols. And off they ran, and eventually Laban overtook them. And we find this in chapter 31. Laban finally caught up with Jacob, and in verse 48, Laban says, "I'm going to make a heap of stone here. This heap is a witness between you and me." Therefore, he named it Galeed, and also Mizpah. Two different languages, but we sometimes call this the Mizpah blessing, but it's not a blessing at all. He said, "This heap is a witness between you and me. The Lord watch between you and me while we are absent one from another." And that's not a blessing at all. That's the word of one con man to another. I don't trust you. You don't trust me. We don't like one another. The Lord is going to have to keep track of you. If you harm my daughters, you'll have me to answer to. Chapter 32, Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him, which is a fascinating thing. What are the angels doing there? And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's camp." And so he named the place Machnaim. We know where that is, just over the border of Israel into Jordan. And Jacob sent messengers, and he sent to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, which is now called Edom. And he's trying to make up with his brother Esau. And the messengers return saying, "Well, we just met Esau, and he's coming with 400 men with him." And Jacob was afraid of Esau. So we have this picture of Jacob sending the flocks and the herds, a huge bribe to Esau, and all of the family is sent on ahead. And Jacob is left up on the plateau of Jordan. And verse 22, that same night he sent everybody, and Jacob was left alone. Verse 24. and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. And when the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." And Jacob said, "I won't let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" He said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." And Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." And he said, "Why would you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen the face of God, yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him as he passed beyond Penuel, limping because of his hip. Now that's a fascinating thing. We call that the wrestling match. And the interpreters go everywhere preaching the gospel from this passage. But the focus of the passage is that Jacob spent his whole life wrestling with God. And in order for God to bless Jacob, he seems to have had to break him. So Jacob ends up a broken man in more ways than one. It was God's intention from the beginning to be a blessing to Jacob. Jacob fought that in every way that he could, all through his life. Let's see if I've got another word. Yeah. In chapters 34 and 35, we get the meeting with Esau, and then the story of Dinah. Dinah is raped by the Shechemites. Shechem was destroyed. All the men were killed. The women became part of Israel. And we get a final blessing of Jacob. God's last blessing on Jacob is in chapter 35. Rachel and Isaac are said to die, the end of chapter 35. And then Jacob finally witnessed all of this, and the sons of Esau and his sons and Esau and Jacob buried Isaac, and that part of the story is over. In chapter 36, just this beginning, we see the succession from Esau. This picture is taken in Petra. The Edomites are the location of Petra, and here's another shot of Petra. The succession from Esau and all of the Edomites going on into chapter 37. And that will take us up on Friday to the story of Joseph as he takes the tribes of Israel down into Egypt. So be back with us on Friday. And my intention, I don't always manage to do quite what I intend, but I give it a try. My intention will be to tell the whole Joseph story on Friday, and we'll finish Genesis on Friday, and then begin in Exodus next Monday. So I'm going to, let's see if I can do this. I'm going to unmute everybody and show our gallery. And we'll see you guys on Friday. Thank you all for being here. We do truly enjoy our time with you, and we look forward to seeing you again in person. We'll see you guys.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jan.
Good night now.
Thank you.
Buonasera. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. John.
Salamat po.
Salamat, Dr. Jan.
Bye-bye.
Buonanotte a tutti.
Thank you so much.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Notte, notte.